Welcome to the Oyster Aero PearlCast, where we sit down with founders and leaders shaping the aviation industry, from freshly formed startups to the biggest names in the sky. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Turbo Resources in Phoenix, Arizona, now operating in 450,000 square feet of state-of-the-art warehouse space. Turbo continues to keep the aviation industry flying and is actively buying material. Now, we hope you enjoy this episode.
All right. Hello, everyone. Jeff Yerge with the Oyster Aero PearlCast, and we love the founders. I'm honored to be here with Nic Lewis of the newly-ish formed Aero C&E. How you doing, Nick?
Yeah, good afternoon, Jeff. I'm very well. You?
I'm doing wonderful. And over here in Memphis, you are over in the UK, yeah?
Yeah, just south of London. So, yeah, London calling.
Awesome. All right, so let's get into it from a founder standpoint. How long you been in the aviation? What attracted you to the industry?
So I was quite an early starter. I left school. I didn't enjoy school. You know, my parents were academic. They pushed me the academic route. You know, I was more of a practical person, so I went and get my hands dirty at a spare parts company, which was quite local to us, and that sort of got my enthusiasm for sort of aviation and parts, and myself and a colleague started our first aviation business when I was 19. So that's back in 1990.
Wow. I waited. I waited till I was like 47. So congrats on getting started early.
Hey, do you know what? I didn't have the luxury of wealthy parents or anything. You know, we came from a very sort of, you know, my mum and dad were working class, and you know, they helped me scrape together a few £1,000s to start the business back in 1990. With a business colleague, and his parents helped him out a little bit, and so, you know, I think we started off on a pretty small shoestring.
Wow, I love this. Okay, so what was the business?
So the business was like PDQ Airspares, which we established in 1990, and then over the years we ended up exiting that business in 2018, 2019. So I was in that business for, you know, over 30 years.
Wow. Okay, so you're 19, and of course everybody loves aviation that looks up at the sky and doesn't do well in school. I mean, that fits really well, but how did you land on C&E? Like, I'm going to start PDQ. Was there some sort of connection with a neighbor or something?
So I ended up going into business with one of my brother's friends. Okay. And he was already in an aviation business.
Got it.
And we'd worked together, and he was actually my previous boss, and we used to deliver AOGs late at night, and we came up with this idea of, like, you know, maybe we could like do our own business. And we were, you know, I was 18, he was like 22, and, you know, we thought we were just joking about. And then we had a customer that we were very, very close with, and they said, look, guys, if you want to go out on your own, then you can count on our business, right? So that's pretty much how it all started. And, you know, within 6 months of starting that business, then wasn't my wife at the time, but my fiance came and worked in the business. So we were a partnership of three, of myself, my wife. We got married the year later, and you know, our other business partner, and we're still very good friends to this day. And no, we made a very good partnership. But going to the sort of C&E side, PDQ was originally set up on components. We were a trading business in sort of 707, 727. You know, these are the days, you know, pretty much you could self-certify parts back in the day, right? So, and then, you know, we've been through the whole spectrum of certification changes, material certification, non-instant statements, that sort of stuff. But pretty much the changing point for us was 9/11. So we had just torn down two Virgin Atlantic 747s. a 747-100 series and a 747-200 series, and pretty much 9/11 hit. And part of that whole deal was that we were going to support Virgin Atlantic with their remaining fleet, and sell some of the other material, and that just crumbled overnight. Like with the whole aviation sector, was changed, and we got into C&E as a bit of a survival mode because low value, low money. We'd sold all our stock, cash was tight. And we, with the help of a very good friend of ours in Detroit, they helped us out with the lamp distribution. So we got involved in GE Lighting, Chicago Miniature, Ashino, that sort of stuff. And what that did gave us the opportunity to go to any airline and MRO and offer them a product. It was a door opener. And from that day, by speaking to customers, speaking to seeing what requirements they wanted, we grew our C&E product. I would like to think that in that time span, we grew PDQ and developed the whole consignment, C&E support, buying C&E surplus, trading C&E surplus, buying C&E distribution. We were pretty pioneers in that sector. And I don't think there's many people out there today that are doing the same thing.
I started at Aviall, and I remember C&E was like pass the potato. Nobody wanted it, just because it can be so complicated, and all this surplus inventory when you're buying in bulk and all that. So I love this. So your successful business was something that you fell into because you had to. And then was it very clear that said, okay, we're just going to focus on this? Or was it like, well, let's just do this for a while and then we'll go back to trading and, rotables? Or was it pretty resolute at the time once you started getting into the distribution side and all that?
I think it became quite quickly apparent that we'd stumbled on the right route, because
Yeah.
as like you said, C&E was quite a dirty word. If you're trading in components, nobody wants to deal in C&E. And I think you'll find if you're dealing in C&E, you don't want to trade in components. And we're at that, even in our new business now, we're at that stage. Components is a turn off for me. You think of the investment. I'd like to think, you sell C&E and it never comes back. Components. You've got ongoing warranties, you've got shipping issues, there's everything that comes with that. And, although C&E is high volume, rejection and warranties is negligible, low cost, in general, it's low cost shipping, and it's easy to handle. Agreed, it's high volume, but it's for me, it's just more comfortable to deal in C&E these days. It's
sure.
And that sort of brings me on to that sort of next thing, is that we do actually sort of partner with quite a lot of the component businesses. Some of the well-established component businesses these days, where airlines or MROs are looking at, offloading assets and stuff. You'll find assets are a mix of components and C&E. We'll strip out the C&E. They'll have the components. So, we work with people like that. So, yeah, our PDQ journey was very good. And it was a good time to exit. My one business partner he was a little bit older and he had some other stuff he wanted to do. And yeah, so, the decision was made that we would exit out the business. Which I didn't really want to do because PDQ was my life,
right.
And I think between him and Claire, my wife, and myself, we did come to the right decision. It was the absolute right thing to do. It was, and it was just before COVID as well. So the timing was perfect, and it wasn't. I'd like to think it was an immaculate sort of business decision, but it wasn't. It was luck, and by doing that gave us a lot more choices in life. We stayed in the business for just over 4 years. with the new owners, and that was okay. I think the people that we transacted with, which is now sort of the FDH group, they were very kind to us, and we had no issues. We'd heard of these horror stories of people selling to private equity, but no, we didn't have any of those issues. But we just felt the time was right to exit ourselves. The business was growing. It was, becoming a bit more corporate, and we're more of a entrepreneurial business. It's a high different sort of mindset. So, we took a year out and then thought about what we may or may not want to do, and it didn't take long into that year out. We thought we've got too much to give, too much knowledge. Life's too short. So we set up Aero.
Sure. All right. I love working with Paul and Will over there at PDQ. So he always says they're pretty darn quick. So
that's what most people, whenever in all the years that we traveled as PDQ, people would say, so what does PDQ stand for? And do you know what? It is pretty damn quick. And, and you think about where you are in directories, and you think if you go to shows, how easy it is to remember. You want something short and catchy, something that will be different. And that's exactly what it stood for.
So was the name picked after a few pints, or was it just pure artistic creativity on your end?
Do you know what? If I was absolutely honest, when Chris and I, we used to in our previous job, when we were doing, we'd do the sales during the day and we'd do the deliveries in the evening, we used to use a freight forwarder called PDQ Freight. Okay.
Yeah.
And we always thought, what a brilliant name. And that's how we came up with the PDQ Airspares name.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, well, I love this all the way around. So you started that and you were quite focused on CNE, and I guess a lot of people that want to start their own companies or branch out, some of them watch them, they talk to me about these. So, the saying is, the harder you work, the luckier you get. So you mentioned maybe it was luck that we sold at the time and all that. And I guess just how would you frame business success in percentages? Is it, just hard work gets you in those right situations, and so it really is that, or how is there a little bit of timing and luck that kind of go into it as well?
I think you have to have a hard working ethic, absolutely. Yeah. And you have to, in that journey, you've got to go through the pain. We talked about 9/11 earlier. That's a lesson in life, and it's probably, I think everybody in business will go through a very difficult time. Probably like most marriages, right? Marriage is not easy, but you got to work at it, and that's the same as business. But I think everybody gets a break. I think everybody gets an opportunity. It's what you do with that and how you exploit it. And I think that's, some people take it, some people don't. But then, if tough one. Some people are just happy, to work through life and take their paycheck, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, but there's also a lot of people out there that are aggressively hungry. They want to succeed, whether it's with personal achievements or business goals. I think most people get delivered up an opportunity at some point in their life. It's just what they do with it.
That's great. So I guess the other question that I have is, all right, so you decided to exit the business, and when you have a founder that exits, I mean, you don't have to be jumping in and starting Aero CNE, right? I mean, I would imagine. I don't know personally, but what I find fascinating is, one, I'm sure you must miss it, but two, you're not done yet. You're ready to still jump back in the industry and keep things going and kind of do it all over again, I guess, in some respects. So, what's the thought process there?
I think one of our drivers is, I think it's always nice to succeed in a particular sector and sort of be the best of what you do. And we had a couple of previous businesses. We had an aviation chemical business, which was called Chemfast Aerospace, which we established. These were all during the terms of PDQ.
Sure.
And that ended up being sold went through a few hands, and I think that's now the sort of the cornerstones of which is sort of Haas, which is now sort of Wesco. So that's where that business started. And you know, we took that business to a certain level, and we were very good at it. Again, you know, we brought on the whole sort of consignment program, working with customers. And then we also established Rotable Repairs, which is the wheel and brake MRO in the UK, and that's still here now, and that's now part. We actually transacted that to Watts Aviation. I think that's now a VSE company. So you know, that's I think we, you know, we took that to a point of where we'd done the best we can, and then sometimes you've just got to go, hey, let's focus on the things that we're best at, and that's how these business, you know, that whole business cycle is cyclical. You know, people start a business, they either stay in it for the rest of their life and hand it down to their family, or they look at sort of exits. And coming back to your original question about Aero C&E, you know, we had too much to give. You know, we were getting a little bit bored, and everyone needs an interest. Plus, we wanted to invest in the next younger generation. We wanted to set this business up, and we have our senior leadership team here is very young, and that's part of what we wanted to do, to actually sort of nurture that sort of skill set, you know, show them what we achieved and what they can achieve. So, you know, although Aero C&E is probably about 12 months old, and we're doing pretty good. I don't expect to be at the helm, you know, in the next 12 or 18 months. I think both my wife and I will step back, and we'll hand it over to the youngsters and let them drive it forward with, hopefully, as they keep referring to me as legacy, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. But I say with legacy is all the knowledge, right? So we'll keep them on their toes. But the idea is to have an interest moving forward, watching the younger generation thrive. That's our goal.
Isn't that weird, scary, and cool at the same time? Like, I started Oyster University so that I could teach new hires the aftermarket, right? Because we know how training is. People just go sit with somebody and whatever. So I started up, we do classes and all that. But I don't know if it's an age or what, but it's like I have that too. Like, I want to bring in the next generation, teach them, and watch them flourish. So that's really that's so interesting. That's so
But
interesting.
if we don't do that, who's going to do it? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and you look over time, everybody's got a peer or somebody they looked up to in the generation prior or whatever. You know, there's people that aspired me, and then you just got to pass that down.
Yeah, for sure. So in the C&E space, specifically, like, do you see that it's going to be a big technology play, or do relationships still really matter? Because I find what's shocking is everybody thinks like, oh, just go buy a light bulb. It's not that. It's like, what I find is that you all get really creative with your airline customers in these procurement solutions, and it's not just this e-commerce click that everybody thinks that it is. So, how do you look at that from a bird's eye view of the implementation of not specific technology, but just overall, like, aviation's clearly relationship oriented. Where does technology kind of weave in that, and especially with, I'll say, newer generations as well? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think going back, you know, years ago there was no web portals. I mean, we used
Right.
to, you know, ILS used to just work off a printer, right? You know, you didn't have any screens or anything. And I always, you know, I think there is a place for web portals, and I think there is a place for AI. But ultimately, is always going to be the cornerstone of business, always.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, and you think of how business has evolved, whether it is corporate entertaining, which is pretty much snuffed out these days because of compliance. The only things that haven't changed is relationships, you know, the shows, the meets and greets, you know, the drinks at the receptions and things like that. That part of the industry hasn't changed, and I think that will continue to thrive. There is a degree of automation. There is a degree of using AI tools to help you manage your internal data. But ultimately, it's about me picking up the phone and say, "Hey Jeff, how you doing? You know, can you help me out on this?" You know, and that won't change.
Yeah, the optimistic view that I heard recently, and I kind of love it, and you can hang on to this, is we were very we were on the phone all the time, we were talking, and now we have so much tasks to do that it's hard to work the relationship into your day. So the hope is that AI will come in and help with those tasks so that we can be free to, you know, have these relationships kind of re-engage, I guess. And I find with myself, like even with Oyster, when we do inventory uploads, we use AI and all that kind of stuff. So it's like my day now is significantly better that I can actually do stuff like this and kind of move things forward. And that I think is a really good use case for its application. So
Yeah, I mean, we recently had spoke to an AI consultancy company, and we're very fortunate because with the business being quite new, we have quite a clean, very clean database. So
sure, yeah,
we don't have a lot of old sort of data. So we can implement the AI tools that we want to implement now that's going to help us moving forward. And I've pretty much, hey, that's a little bit above my pay grade, right? So I've pretty much left that to the youngsters, right? What do you want to see in the business? What tools do you want to see drive this business forward? What tools does this AI tools does this business is going to help the customers? So yeah, they're going to drive that forward, and I'm just going to probably listen and get bamboozled.
that is so cool. I love it. All right, so over under, we're gonna put your wife on as well. Is Aero C&E your sunset business, and after that, or is it possible that we'll see you for another 20 years just dabbling and starting things? And what do you think there?
I think
That's
we're
if
going.
you don't want to answer because she's not here, I get that too. So
I don't know. She's in the background, right? So like,
did she
I
look over?
I think we're going to be around for a while.
Yeah,
This it's a great business. It's a fun business. It's not a salary. It's a passion. And I love business. I love the relationships we make in business. A lot of my best friends are people that I've met through aviation,
sure.
and I want to make more. I want to make more of those, and I want to see. It's infectious to see the next generation succeed. So,
It is.
no, whether we're doing business from a sunbed in the Bahamas or something, it's we'll be doing it for some time. Plus, I like to think we're not old enough yet.
Perfect. All right. Well, Nic, thank you so much for coming. And I can tell you, out of all of them that I've done, I've enjoyed them, but this has been one of the top ones because I think your story is just so interesting. So I have one more question. Um, you're 19 and starting this aircraft parts business while all your friends at the time probably were more interested in whatever, right? Was that hard to lock in at that age? Because some people don't find themselves till their mid 20s, and they don't that discovery. Was that? I would imagine your friends were like, "No, what are you doing?"
It was a big leap, but when I was at school, I had three jobs. Okay,
Okay,
and so I'm not afraid of work. I'm not afraid of hours. I'm not
sure,
afraid of putting a shift in. Um, it made me grow up quickly. Both my
of
wife and
course,
I, as you rightly said, we had friends that were out partying, and we were married young. We had children young. It's actually our son that is spearheading, Aero C&E at the moment. And he's 20. He's just 30. So he was working at PDQ for I think 12 or 13 years. But did we miss out? No, because we did everything early, and we
yeah,
can now we can now enjoy the things like I'm 56, okay, and I'm very fortunate. I've done a lot, and there's still a lot more to come. But we're not too old to do stuff.
yeah.
So yes, we did miss out on a lot of stuff, but I think upon reflection, we're getting a lot more later on.
Absolutely. So the lesson is don't wait. Get started if you have this in you, or at least give it a shot, right?
Never be afraid.
All right. So I'm looking forward to a podcast in about a year with your son. We're gonna book that now. We'll put it on the books, and we'll let him share his perspectives down the road a bit. So
Well, our daughter's a doctor and she's itching to get into the business, all right? So, you know,
there can't be that many that went through medical school and came over. She would be one of the few, but I'll bet she'll do well at it. So.
yeah.
All right, Nic. Good talking to you, and we'll catch up soon.
Absolute pleasure, Jeff. You take care.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.